While Eva Braun was hidden away as Hitler's secret companion, another woman was living as the actual First Lady of Nazi Germany, hosting Mussolini, presiding over state dinners, and letting lion cubs pad through rooms decorated with looted art. But Emmy Göring wasn't born into power or politics. She was a middling provincial actress who never landed a leading role on any major stage. And yet she pulled off the greatest performance of her life, playing the gracious queen of a criminal regime so convincingly that she spent the next 28 years insisting it wasn't acting. The Chocolate King's daughter. Emmy Sonnemann was born on 24th of March 1893 in Hamburg, the daughter of a wealthy chocolate manufacturer. It was a solidly bourgeois beginning, the kind of comfortable, predictable upbringing that makes everything that followed feel like a casting error. She trained as an actress and spent the next 2 decades working theatres across Hamburg, Munich, Vienna, Stuttgart and Weimar. She married a fellow actor named Karl Küstlin in 1916, divorced him by 1926, and by her late 30s had settled into the life of a competent but unremarkable provincial performer. No breakthrough role ever came, no critical acclaim, no trajectory toward anything larger than regional theatre, and polite applause from small audiences. So when she met Hermann Göring at a social gathering in Weimar in 1932, she wasn't a naive young woman swept off her feet by a powerful man. She was a 39-year-old professional performer who had spent her entire adult life reading rooms, studying audiences, and learning how to hold attention. She recognised the audition of a lifetime, and she took the part without hesitation. The wedding that was a weapon. On April 10, 1935, Emmy and Hermann married in the Berlin Cathedral. Adolf Hitler stood as witness. Tens of thousands of uniformed Nazi formations lined the streets outside while military aircraft roared overhead in formation. The Bau ceremony was broadcast nationwide, carried into living rooms across Germany as though it were a state occasion, because that's exactly what it was. This wasn't a wedding, it was a propaganda deployment designed to present the Nazi leadership as cultured, legitimate, and worthy of admiration. Emmy's farewell performance at the Prussian State Theatre came that same year. Göring had already named her a Prussian state actress in 1934, a title that carried both prestige and a generous pension. She told the press she was retiring from the stage, but that wasn't quite true. She hadn't stopped acting. She'd simply moved to a much bigger stage, with a far larger audience and stakes that went well beyond a curtain call. Every day from that point forward, her role was the same: to make the Third Reich look civilized. If you're finding the hidden side of Nazi history as strange as I do, hit subscribe, because it only gets weirder from here. The Fantasy Kingdom. This is where Emmy Göring's daily life stops resembling anything a viewer might expect. She spent most of her time at Carinhall, Hermann Göring's sprawling hunting estate in the Schorfheide forest north of Berlin, named after his first wife, Karin, who had died in 1931. The estate was enormous and deliberately theatrical. Contemporary accounts describe massive halls filled with antlers and hunting trophies, rooms decorated with what post-war investigators confirmed were looted artworks, old masters stolen from Jewish collections across occupied Europe, paintings that had once hung in private homes and galleries now served as background decor for dinner parties. Hermann had installed a gigantic model railway that he and guests played with for hours, crouching over miniature landscapes like children while the real world outside burned. He dressed in velvet and fur outfits that shifted between medieval fantasy and operatic costume. Robes, embroidered jackets, jewelled daggers tucked into silk, sashes. And then there was the private zoo. Lion cubs padded through the terraces and salons like household pets, sprawling across furniture and nudging guests for attention. When Benito Mussolini visited Carinhall, Emmy and Hermann presented a lion cub as casually as another couple might offer a cocktail. One contemporary observer noted the zoo required enough meat to feed an entire village, all while wartime rationing squeezed ordinary German families into ever tighter portions. But Carinhall was only one piece of the fantasy. The couple rotated between Göring's Berlin residences, a luxury yacht called Karin II, a gift from the German automobile industry, and a thatched holiday house on the fashionable island of Sylt. Emmy moved between these settings like an actress between stage sets, always dressed for the part, always ready for the next audience. None of this was personal eccentricity. It was regime-funded spectacle built on systematic theft, and Emmy was its lead, performer every single day. She woke each morning inside a world assembled from the possessions of people who had been robbed, deported, or worse, and her job was to make it all look elegant. The regime's leading lady, Emmy didn't just live in this world, she curated it into a quasi-royal persona. Staff were required to address her as Ho Dame, meaning High Lady. She was chauffeured between residences in motorcades. She dressed for every reception as though it were a coronation, and she treated the role with the discipline of a performer who had finally landed the part she'd always wanted. But her daily routine had a dimension most viewers won't expect. Starting in 1936, Emmy chaired the Emmy Göring Künstlerstiftung, a foundation that oversaw a retirement home for aging theatre artists in Weimar. This meant daily correspondence, administrative decisions, and filtering petitions from artists across Germany who were hoping for financial support or professional patronage. She reviewed these requests, made decisions in the cultural sector, and submitted them to her husband in his capacity as the regime's overlord of theatre and opera. Hermann Göring controlled Prussia's state theatres, and Emmy served as his gatekeeper. This wasn't a vanity title on fancy letterhead. It was a lever of real cultural influence, and she pulled it every single day. She decided who received help and who was ignored, a quiet but meaningful kind of power. And there was a deeper structural reason why her daily routine mattered so much to the regime. Eva Braun was Hitler's companion, but the German public had no idea she existed. Hitler kept Eva hidden because he believed his bachelor image was politically useful. The idea that he was married to Germany itself, devoted entirely to the nation. But someone had to fill the void at public events, and Emmy stepped into it naturally. She appeared at receptions, theatre premieres, charity galas, and state ceremonies as the regime's public feminine face. Foreign dignitaries visiting Berlin encountered Emmy, not Eva. Press photographs featured Emmy, not Eva. She was, in every functional sense, the First Lady of the Third Reich. And she embraced the role completely. This is what made her routine so valuable to the regime. Every gracious handshake with a foreign ambassador, every glamorous photograph in the newspapers, every warm smile at a state reception helped present Nazi leadership as sophisticated, cultured, and normal. She turned mass theft into background decor and made a criminal government look civilized. That wasn't an accident. That was the performance she delivered every single day, the price of a coffee remark. But behind the glamour, there were teeth, and they were sharp. Shortly after the lavish 1935 wedding, an opera singer named Helene von Weinmann made an offhand remark to acquaintances. She'd known Emmy back in the provincial theatre days, back when Emmy wasn't the great lady and was available for a cup of coffee and 2 shillings 50. It was a casual, almost affectionate jab. The kind of remark old colleagues make about someone who's risen far beyond expectations. But in Nazi Germany, casual remarks about the powerful had consequences. That single sentence cost Weinmann everything. She was denounced, arrested, and beaten during interrogation. A court sentenced her to 3 years in a penitentiary. She wasn't released until 1943, and by then she was gravely ill from years of imprisonment. Whether Emmy personally pushed for the prosecution or merely benefited from a climate where criticising Nazi grandees was swiftly and brutally punished, remains genuinely unclear in the historical record. No document directly ties her to the denunciation, but the result was identical either way. The woman who chaired a foundation dedicated to helping theatre artists did absolutely nothing to protect a fellow artist destroyed for telling the truth about her past. That silence tells you everything about the kind of First Lady Emmy Göring actually was, and it reveals the iron underneath the velvet. The feud that got her exiled. Emmy's claim to the First Lady title didn't go unchallenged. It put her on a collision course with two women who had their own reasons to resent her. Magda Goebbels, who harboured ambitions for that same role as the wife of the propaganda minister, and Eva Braun, whom Emmy persistently and openly snubbed. Emmy treated Eva with naked condescension at every encounter. She refused to acknowledge Eva's status as Hitler's companion. She behaved, by multiple accounts, as though Eva simply didn't rank, as though being the most powerful man in Europe's romantic partner was somehow beneath notice. At gatherings where both women were present, Emmy conducted herself like royalty greeting a servant. She made no effort to hide her disdain, and the people around her noticed. But Emmy had miscalculated badly. She had spent years reading audiences, judging which performances landed and which fell flat. And yet, she completely misjudged the one audience she couldn't afford to offend. Hitler personally intervened, ordering Hermann Göring to make his wife treat Eva with respect. It was a direct command from the head of the regime, delivered through her own husband. And when Emmy's behaviour still didn't change to Hitler's satisfaction, the consequence was swift and devastating. Emmy was frozen out of invitations to the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat, the inner social court where real influence was brokered over tea, mountain walks, and late-night conversations. The woman who had built her entire public identity as the regime's leading lady was quietly expelled from the only stage that actually mattered. She could still host dignitaries at Carinhall. She could still chair her foundation and smile for photographers. But the inner circle, the place where decisions were made and loyalties tested, was closed to her. The irony is extraordinary. Emmy lost her position not because of politics, not because of the war, not because of any moral reckoning, but because she couldn't stop looking down on the woman Hitler loved. A trained actress who had spent decades reading rooms and calibrating her performance misjudged the one relationship that could end her career. The curtain falls. As the war turned against Germany, the fantasy kingdom disintegrated piece by piece. Carinhall was evacuated in early 1945. The looted art was packed onto trains and scattered across hiding places in southern Germany. The estate itself was blown up to keep it from the advancing Soviets. Hermann Göring ordering the destruction of the palace that had defined his image for a decade. Emmy fled south with her young daughter Edda, born in 1938 during the height of the regime's power. American forces arrested them in May 1945, and Emmy spent the following months in various internment camps. But even in custody, she couldn't let go of the role. Camp staff reported ongoing quarrels because Emmy kept putting up a photograph of Hermann in her quarters and demanding its stay. She was mostly bedridden with sciatica, insisting on medical treatment befitting her former status, telling anyone who would listen that she was being persecuted simply for being married to a prominent man. The fantasy kingdom was rubble. Her husband had been convicted of war crimes at Nuremberg and swallowed a cyanide capsule hours before his scheduled execution. And yet, the performance continued without interruption. In 1948, a denazification court classified Emmy as an active National Socialist. The tribunal confiscated 30% of her remaining assets, credited her internment as time served for a one-year labour camp sentence, and banned her from the stage for 5 years, effectively ending any hope of returning to acting. She retreated to a small fifth-floor apartment in Munich, nursing chronic pain and surviving on a modest pension supplemented by old acquaintances who remembered the family's former glory. The woman who had once been addressed as High Lady now shared a hallway with strangers and climbed 5 flights of stairs to reach a home that could have fit inside one of Carinhall's guest rooms. The performance that never ended. And here is where the final act begins. A long, slow curtain call that lasted a quarter of a century. Emmy spent her remaining 25 years replaying and romanticizing her former life. In 1967, she published a memoir called An der Seite meines Mannes, My Life with Göring. The book portrays both Emmy and Hermann as essentially apolitical aesthetes who loved art, culture, and each other. It makes no mention of Göring's role in founding the Gestapo. It omits his central involvement in the persecution of Jews and the plunder of an entire continent. It reads like the memoir of a woman married to a misunderstood patron of the arts rather than one of the most powerful criminals in European history. Her own words capture the delusion with painful clarity. She wrote that high politics had not occupied her much, as with most women, and that she was merely an actress who served an apolitical stage art. A German court had already ruled otherwise, classifying her not as a passive follower, but as an active participant in the regime she now claimed had nothing to do with her. Emmy Göring died in Munich on the 8th of June 1973 at the age of 80. Her daughter Edda would spend the rest of her own life defending her father's memory, petitioning courts for confiscated property, attending gatherings of former Nazi officials, and refusing until her death in 2018 to acknowledge what her parents had been part of. The performance, it seemed, was inherited. So what did Emmy Göring actually do all day? She woke in a palace decorated with stolen art. She was addressed as High Lady by servants. She played with lion cubs in rooms where looted. Masterpieces hung on the walls. She hosted foreign dignitaries who left thinking the Nazi regime was sophisticated and refined. She ran a cultural foundation while a fellow artist who mocked her rotted in prison. She feuded with Eva Braun until Hitler himself had to intervene. And when it all collapsed, she spent nearly 3 decades insisting none of it was political. Emmy Göring's daily routine wasn't harmless. It was the regime's most convincing argument that everything was normal, delivered by a trained actress who never once broke character, not even after the curtain came down. Thanks for watching History Hangover. If you found this video insightful, check out our other deep dives into the hidden aftermath of World War II. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next upload.